Just a few months ago, Sanae Takeuchi stood before the press with a look of stoic determination, dismissing any talk of a snap election. She insisted her hands were full with economic policy, that there was no time for political maneuvering. It was the image of a leader focused solely on the grind of governance, seemingly indifferent to the power games of the diet. But fast forward to this week, and that same composure has transformed into something much more aggressive. A calculated lightning strike that has left the opposition scrambling in what they're calling a baseless raid on the status quo. On the surface, it looks like a standard political play. Dissolve the House of Representatives while your approval rating is sitting at a staggering 70%. It's the kind of opportunity any politician would find hard to resist. But as you look closer at the math she's doing, the target isn't just winning more seats, it's about a total structural bypass. Right now, she's tethered to coalition partners who are breathing down her neck, threatening to walk away and collapse her government if she doesn't meet their demands. She is, for the moment, a giant tied down by Lilliputians. However, there is a specific, almost hidden mechanism in the Japanese constitution she's betting the House on. It's called the Superiority of the House of Representatives. If she can hit a very specific number 310 seats, the upper house, which currently stands as a fortress for the opposition, effectively ceases to exist in any meaningful way. She could pass a law, watch the upper house reject it, and then simply override them with a 2/3 majority. The shift from too busy for politics to dissolving parliament isn't just a change in schedule, it's a high-stakes gamble to transform from what critics called the weakest administration into a powerhouse comparable to the late Shinzo Abe. She isn't just looking for an election victory, she's looking to hollow out the very system that is supposed to keep her in check. The question is, will the Japanese public hand her the keys to an absolute monarchy, or is this the moment her 70% luck finally runs out?
And that question is hanging over everything in Tokyo right now. It is the political equivalent of putting all your chips on a single number at the roulette table.
A huge, huge gamble. But to really get why the wheel is spinning right now, we have to, ground ourselves in the timeline. The calendar here is everything.
It's incredibly compressed.
Right. Let's just set the scene. Today is Friday, January 30, 2026. And the air in Tokyo, you could almost feel it. It is absolutely electric.
It's tense. And it all happened so fast, the House of Representatives was dissolved just last week.
On January 23rd, the lightning strike, as they're calling it.
Absolutely. It was designed to maximize chaos. The opposition was caught completely flat-footed. Frankly, a lot of people in her own party, the LDP, were caught off guard, too.
And the election itself is just over a week away. Voting is scheduled for February 8th. That is an incredibly short campaign period.
It is. It favors the incumbent. It favors the party with the most money and organization. And it prevents the opposition from getting a real narrative going.
And we need to be crystal clear about the stakes here. This isn't just about gaining a few seats or, reshuffling the cabinet.
Not at all. Prime Minister Takeuchi has drawn a very hard line in the sand.
She has. She's explicitly stated that if her coalition fails to secure at least a simple majority, what's the number there?
233 seats.
Right, 233. If they don't hit that number, she's gone. She will resign immediately.
She's putting her entire premiership on the line. And you have to remember, this is her first real electoral test. She took office back in October 2025. But she wasn't elected by the public. She was chosen by the party. This is her first time facing the voters as prime minister.
So our mission for this deep dive is to really look under the hood of this political machine. We're going to try and dissect how an administration that everyone, and I mean everyone, was calling weak just a few months ago.
A minority government completely beholden to its junior partners.
Exactly. How that weak administration is now attempting to engineer this massive, what we're calling a structural bypass of the entire Japanese parliamentary system.
It's a fundamental rewiring of how power works in Japan.
So we're going to look at the Constitution, we're going to look at the coalition politics, the economy, and the whole geopolitical chessboard to really understand this gamble.
It all comes down to one thing, really. Unlocking state capacity. That's the key phrase. She wants to move from a system that's built for consensus and, frankly, delay.
And gridlock.
To a system that is designed for speed, for decisiveness, and for executive dominance.
So let's start there with that core concept, the structural bypass. It sounds like a medical procedure, and I guess in a way it kind of is for the body politic.
A triple bypass, maybe.
Right.
Yeah.
But to understand the proposed solution, We have to really feel the pain, the problem she's trying to solve. I want to share a perspective that I think frames this perfectly, especially when we talk about this mechanism called the superiority of the House of Representatives.
Please go ahead.
I've heard that in the corridors of the Diet, in Kasumigaseki where the ministries are, the air has just grown thick with this new kind of urgency. And I want you to imagine a veteran bureaucrat, maybe in the Ministry of Economy, Trade, and Industry Metadai. Let's call him Tanaka-san.
A career guy.
A career guy. 30 years on the job. And for 30 years, he has watched ambitious, necessary infrastructure projects just wither and die in what they call the twisted diet.
The nijiru kokai.
Exactly. The twisted diet, where the upper house basically acts as a graveyard for progress. And you can picture him sitting at his desk late at night, looking at a map of a proposed high-speed rail expansion, or maybe a plan for a new semiconductor supply chain, something that's been stalled for a decade.
Just gathering dust in a file cabinet.
Exactly. So to a guy like him, Takeuchi's gamble for this two-thirds majority, it's not just some political maneuver. It's a long overdue surgical strike against stagnation. He's feeling this sense of quiet hope that, for the first time in his career, this superiority of the House of Representatives clause will actually be used to bypass the procedural drag that's kept Japan in a standstill.
And that perspective is absolutely crucial, because it shows this isn't just about raw political ambition. The bureaucracy, the people who are actually supposed to run the country, feel paralyzed. They can't do their job.
As a journalist covering this, you can't help but feel the weight of that expectation. I mean, we can talk about the dangers of consolidating power, and we will, but it's hard not to empathize with the frustration of a professional who just wants to see the nation's gears finally turn without all this friction.
Well, let's unpack that mechanism you mentioned, the superiority of the House of Representatives. It sounds like a superpower from a manga, but it's a very specific and very powerful legal tool.
So break it down for us. What is it exactly?
Okay, so it's all laid out in Article 59 of the Japanese Constitution. As you know, Japan has a bicameral legislature, 2 houses.
The lower house and the upper house.
Right. The House of Representatives, which is the more powerful lower house, and the House of Councilors, the upper house. Normally, for a bill to become law, it has to pass in both chambers.
Standard checks and balances. We see that in a lot of countries.
But, and this is the critical part, the Japanese Constitution builds in an override. If the upper house rejects a bill, the lower house has already passed.
Which happens all the time in a twisted diet.
All the time. Or, and this is a common tactic, if they just sit on it, if they refuse to vote on it for 60 days, just to stall.
Right. The pocket veto, essentially.
The lower house has a trump card. They can bring that exact same bill up for a second vote. And if they can pass it this time with a 2/3 majority, the bill becomes law.
Wait, just like that.
Right.
The upper house vote is just erased.
Just like that. The upper house is completely overridden. Their veto becomes meaningless. For that specific piece of legislation, they effectively cease to exist.
So they can shout no as loud as they want, but if the prime minister has a 2/3 majority in the lower house, she can basically just say, thanks for your input, but we're doing it anyway.
Precisely. That is the structural bypass.
Yeah.
Takeuchi isn't just trying to win an election. She is trying to secure enough seats to essentially delete the upper house from the legislative process whenever it becomes inconvenient.
Which brings us back to the current problem. Why is this so urgent now? You mentioned the twisted diet.
We're in a classic nijiru kokai situation. The ruling coalition, the LDP and its partner, they control the lower house, but they don't control the upper house. The opposition has a majority there.
So the upper house has become a fortress for the opposition.
A fortress and a roadblock. They use it to block legislation, to water down reforms, to force massive compromises, or just to delay everything until the government looks incompetent and the public gets fed up.
Which brings us back to our bureaucrat, Tanaka-san, staring at his map of the stalled bullet train. He's not seeing a chamber of wisdom, he's seeing a graveyard for national progress.
And Takeuchi is channeling that frustration. Her entire calculation is just simple, brutal math. The magic number she's aiming for is 310.
Okay, where does 310 come from?
There are 465 seats in the lower house. 2/3 of 465 is 310. If her coalition can win 310 seats, she holds the keys to the kingdom. She gets her override.
310. That just seems like an incredibly high bar, a landslide of historic proportions. Where do they stand right now before the election?
The current coalition, the LDP and Nippon Ishin no Kai, they hold roughly 230 to 233 seats, right around that simple majority line.
So they need to pick up almost 80 seats.
It's a massive climb. It requires a wave election. But, and this is a really important piece of context, it is not historically impossible.
It's been done before.
It has. Under the late Shinzo Abe, who Takeuchi models herself after, the LDP-Komeito coalition held over 310 seats. They had 326 after the 2012 election and 313 after the 2014 election.
So there is a precedent. She's trying to recreate that Abe-era juggernaut.
She's trying to convince the public that the only way to get things done is to return to that era of single-party dominance.
But there's a big philosophical question here, isn't there? I mean, the upper house is traditionally called the Chamber of Wisdom, Senjin, the House of Counselors. It's supposed to be the saucer that cools the hot tea of the lower house.
The check on the fervor of the masses, yes.
It has longer 6-year terms, so its members are supposed to be insulated from the day-to-day political winds. They're meant to think long-term. If Takeuchi gets this power to just bypass it, aren't we losing something vital in the democratic process?
That is the textbook argument, and it's a powerful one.
Right.
But the credibility of the upper house as a chamber of wisdom has taken a serious beating recently.
How so?
There's a really controversial phenomenon happening right now that Takeuchi's supporters are pointing to as proof that the upper house is, well, broken. It's called the Reiwa rotation.
The Reiwa rotation. Okay, that sounds like a DJ move or something. What is that?
It's a political tactic being used by one of the opposition parties, Reiwa Shinsengumi, which is led by the actor-turned-politician Yamamoto Taro.
Okay, I know them. They're a populist, anti-establishment party.
Exactly. And here's how their rotation system works. An upper house term is 6 years long. But instead of one of their members serving the full 6 years, they resign after just 1 year.
They just quit.
They quit.
Yeah.
And then, because of the proportional representation system, the next person on the party's list automatically takes their seat for the next year. And then they resign, and the next person on the list comes in.
Hold on. So they're passing the seat around like a hot potato. 1 6-year term is being split between 5 or 6 different people.
Essentially, yes. For example, a famous comedian-turned-politician named Tsutobashi Hakaze was elected. Then he resigned for health reasons. Oshima Kusuo took his place. Then, the party leader announced a formal policy where 5 different members would rotate through a single seat, each serving for about a year.
What's their justification for doing that?
They argue that it maximizes diversity. It gives more people from different backgrounds, a chance to have parliamentary experience and a voice in the Diet.
But doesn't that completely undermine the entire purpose of the upper house? The whole point of a 6-year term is stability. It's so they don't have to be in constant campaign mode. They're supposed to have a time and space to think deeply about complex issues.
Well, that is precisely the constitutional critique.
If you're only there for 12 months, you're not a long-term steward. You're a temp.
That's the argument. Article 43 of the Constitution says Diet members are representatives of all the people. The question becomes, if you're resigning on the command of your party boss to let the next person on the list have a turn, are you really a representative of the people? Or are you just an employee of the party machine?
It creates a massive identity crisis for the entire institution.
It does. It fundamentally delegitimizes the chamber. And it gives Takeuchi a golden political opportunity.
Because she can just point to that and say, look, these guys aren't wise sages contemplating the future of the nation. They're playing musical chairs with a Diet seat. Why should we let them block critical national security legislation?
Precisely. It allows her to frame this potential power grab, not as a move toward tyranny, but as a necessary step toward efficiency and good governance. She can argue that in an increasingly dangerous world, Japan simply cannot afford a twisted Diet that plays these kinds of political games. She needs the engine to run smooth and run fast.
But to get that engine, she needs the 310 seats. And to do that, she needs a unified front. But right now, her own camp is, well, it's a mess.
It's incredibly fractured.
She's basically fighting a war on 2 fronts, one against the official opposition and another one inside her own so-called coalition.
And that brings us to the Lilliputians tying down the giant, the internal friction.
Let's talk about that, because getting to 310 isn't just about the math, it's about relationships. And the relationships right now are incredibly toxic. I want to bring in another perspective here.
Okay.
I saw a post online from a longtime LDP grassroots organizer in Osaka. Now, as you know, Osaka is a unique beast in Japanese politics. It's the home turf of their coalition partner.
Ishin's stronghold.
Exactly. And this organizer, he's lived through the day-to-day exhausting friction of the current coalition. He described it as a constant political tax being paid to Nippon Ishin no Kai.
That's a great way to put it.
He talked about the endless concessions, the policy compromises, and this looming threat always in the background that the junior partner could just pull the plug at any moment and bring the government down.
A sword of Damocles hanging over her head.
He wrote about the exhaustion of trying to explain to voters why national policy always feels like a series of half measures, why nothing ever gets fully done. So for him, Takeuchi's big push for an independent LDP majority isn't just about power. He called it a quest for sovereignty within his own government.
He wants his party to be able to govern without asking for permission.
Yes. He said he imagines a morning after the February 8th election where the LDP leadership no longer has to check the mood of a fickle, unreliable partner before making a strategic decision for the country. And reading that, you really understand the desire for a unified will. Even if you're worried about the right-leaning trajectory of this administration, you have to recognize the human exhaustion behind a government that's been forced to rule with one hand tied behind its back.
Political tax is the perfect phrase. And to really understand why this tax is so high right now, we have to talk about the LDP's historic divorce.
Right. For more than 20 years, it was always the LDP-Komeito coalition. That was the brand. The big tent conservative LDP and the Buddhist-backed, more moderate Komeito.
That political marriage is over. It has ended. And that is a truly historic realignment of Japanese politics. Komeito has left the building.
Where did they go?
They formed a new alliance. It's called the Centrist Reform Alliance, and they've teamed up with the main opposition party, the Constitutional Democratic Party, or CDP.
Wow. So the LDP's dance partner of 2 decades is now dancing with their biggest rival.
Yes. So the LDP had to find a new partner, and they've ended up in this arrangement with Nippon Ishin no Kai, the Japan Innovation Party.
And you're calling it an arrangement for a reason?
I am. Notice I didn't say coalition. It's officially a confidence and supply agreement. It's a much more imperfect, unstable partnership.
What does that mean in practice?
It means Ishin supports the LDP on confidence votes, like approving the Prime Minister and on the budget to keep the government running. But that's it. They signed a policy agreement back in October 2025, but they pointedly refused to take any cabinet positions.
So they want the influence without any of the responsibility.
Exactly. And they retain the right to vote freely on any other piece of legislation. It gives them maximum leverage. They're holding a gun to Takeuchi's head.
And they're making some very specific demands.
The very specific and very aggressive demands that are designed to appeal to voters. They want to reduce the number of Diet members by 10%.
The classic cut the number of politicians promise.
Right. And they want a total ban on corporate and group donations to political parties. That's a huge one.
And they've threatened to walk if they don't get them.
They have. Ishin's co-leader, Fujita Fumitake, has been incredibly blunt in public. His line is, no reform, no support. If Takeuchi doesn't deliver these populist reforms, Ishin walks, the government loses its majority, and it collapses.
That explains the LDP organizers' frustration perfectly. Takeuchi is the prime minister of the world's 3rd largest economy, but she's constantly having to look over her shoulder at this much smaller party.
And the math is just brutal for her. The LDP currently has 199 seats in the lower house.
Okay, 199.
Ishin has 34.
34.
You need 233 for a simple majority.
Yeah.
You do the math, 199 plus 34 is exactly 233. She needs every single Ishin vote just to keep the lights on. She has zero room for error.
But here's the craziest part of this whole arrangement. In places like Osaka, where that LDP organizer lives, the LDP and Ishin are not partners. They are mortal enemies.
It's a complete contradiction. In Tokyo, in the national diet, they have this flimsy partnership. But out in the districts, they are fighting tooth and nail.
How many districts?
In this election, the LDP and Ishin are running candidates directly against each other in 155 single-member districts.
155? That's a third of the seats.
It's an absolutely unsustainable situation. Imagine the U.S. president needing a specific party's votes to pass laws in Washington, but in almost a third of the congressional districts, their local chapters are running attack ads and trying to destroy each other.
So when Takeuchi talks about a structural bypass, she's not just talking about bypassing the opposition in the upper house. She's also trying to bypass her own partner, Ishin.
That is the ultimate strategic goal. The 2/3 majority is the dream scenario. But the minimum goal, the one she'll resign over, is an LDP-only simple majority.
She wants the LDP alone to hit 233 seats.
If she can do that, Ishin loses all of its leverage overnight. She can turn to them and say, "Thank you for your support. It was very helpful, but we don't need you to survive anymore." She neutralizes them.
But can she do it? Especially without Komeito. Komeito's organized vote machine, the Soka Gakkai, was legendary.
It was. They could reliably deliver 20,000, 30,000 votes like clockwork in key districts. That's a huge block of votes that the LDP no longer has access to.
So how does she make up that difference?
That is the core of her gamble. She is betting that her personal popularity, that 70–80% approval rating, and a massive surge of conservative voters will be enough.
What conservative voters?
The ones who always hated the alliance with the moderate Komeito. The ones who felt the LDP was always compromising its principles. Takeuchi is betting that her hardline nationalist stance will bring the silent majority of conservatives home to the LDP.
So it's a high-wire act. She's trading the reliable, organized votes of Komeito for the hope of a populist conservative wave. Exactly. She's betting that the Japanese public wants strength, clarity, and decisiveness more than they want the messy compromises of coalition politics. And the main pillar of that argument is the economy.
Right. It always comes back to the economy. Because if you're a regular person, you might not care about Article 59 or the LDP-Ishin infighting. You care about your job, your paycheck, and whether your country has a future.
And that's the story she's selling. The power is the means. A strong economy is the end.
Let's pivot to that. Let's really dig into the economic vision. I want to use one last perspective to frame this.
Okay.
Try to imagine a young researcher. She's working at a biotech startup in Tsukuba, Japan's science city. Her entire career, her entire life's work, depends on what she calls hard metrics.
R&D investment, patent conversion rates, things like that.
Exactly. Grant approvals. And for years, she has watched her lab's funding oscillate, not based on the quality of her research, but based on legislative gridlock in Tokyo. Every time the Diet stalls on the budget, her projects freeze.
The money just stops flowing. So to her, all this political noise is secondary. What she hears is the promise of a government that is finally empowered to deliver a tangible economic resurgence. She envisions a streamlined process where state capacity means her lab gets the resources it needs to compete with labs in Boston or Shenzhen, unhindered by months of parliamentary bickering.
So for her, the Takeuchi era isn't about ideology. It's about a shift from abstract debate to concrete output.
Yes. High-speed rails that actually get built, tech patents that get funded, industrial might that gets restored. Watching this all unfold, you can really see how the promise of pure effectiveness can be a powerful sedative for any political concerns.
We might worry about the lack of checks and balances in a strong government.
But for people on the front lines of Japan's economic survival, results are the only language that matters. It's a pragmatic, maybe even stark vision of a Japan that finally decides it wants to move at the speed of the 21st century.
And that researcher you described, she represents the absolute core of Takeuchi's appeal. It's not about being left-wing or right-wing. It's about competence versus incompetence.
For a decade, we heard about Abenomics. The three arrows is what we're seeing now just. Abenomics 2.0. Is Takeuchi Economics just a sequel?
I'd call it more of a hard reboot.
Okay.
It's much more focused on industrial policy and what we've been calling state capacity. She isn't just trying to stimulate demand with monetary policy. She is actively picking winners.
And she has a list.
She has a very specific list. The government's Growth Strategy Council, which she chairs personally, has targeted 17 strategic fields for massive investment.
And the list includes the usual suspects, I assume. AI, semiconductors, quantum technology.
Yes, all the high-tech fields are there.
Yeah.
But what's really interesting is what else is on the list? Shipbuilding. The marine sector.
Shipbuilding stood out to me. In a world of AI and quantum, that feels very 19th century.
It's actually very 21st century when you think about it through the lens of supply chain security and national defense. Japan is an island nation, totally dependent on maritime trade. Takeuchi wants to revive that industry not just for jobs, but as a core component of national security.
She wants to build things again.
She wants to build tangible things. Her whole vision is about creating a new technology-based nation. It's very hardware heavy, and another huge part of that is nuclear energy.
She's been a big proponent of nuclear for a long time.
A huge proponent. Restarting all the existing plants that have been idle since Fukushima, yes, but also investing heavily in R&D for next-generation reactors. Specifically, she's mentioned nuclear fusion as a long-term goal.
That is ambitious. But it all leads to the trillion-yen question. Where is the money for all this going to come from? Japan already has the highest debt-to-GDP ratio in the developed world. You can't just keep printing yen forever, can you?
Well, that is the central friction point in her whole plan. She advocates for what she calls a responsible, proactive fiscal policy, which sounds a bit like a contradiction.
Responsible and proactive don't always go together when you're talking about government spending.
To justify it, she uses a concept called the golden rule of public finance.
The golden rule, as in do unto others.
In fiscal terms, it's a bit different. It means you conceptually separate the government's budget into two buckets.
Okay.
Bucket one is current expenditures, things like public sector salaries, pensions, Social Security. The golden rule says this bucket must be balanced by tax revenue. No borrowing for day-to-day costs.
That sounds responsible. What's in bucket two?
Bucket two is investment. Building that high-speed rail, funding that biotech lab in Tsukuba, developing fusion reactors. The golden rule says it is not only acceptable but desirable to issue government bonds, to go into debt to fund this bucket.
Because you're creating future assets and future growth. It's the spend money to make money argument.
Exactly. It's a way to reframe government debt. It's not a burden, it's an investment in the future.
It's a compelling argument, but is the bond market buying it? I mean, they are essentially the casino where the house always wins.
They are not entirely convinced. The market is acting as a natural brake on her ambitions. We're seeing interest rates start to rise in Japan after decades of being near zero.
And that makes borrowing more expensive.
Dramatically more expensive. The Daiichi Life Research Institute just put out a report on the new budget, and it's stark. They calculate that debt service costs, just the money Japan pays in interest on its existing debt, jumped by 3.1 trillion yen in the FY 2026 budget.
3.1 trillion yen. That's an astronomical amount of money that isn't going to the researcher in Tsukuba. It's not building anything. It's just vanishing into interest payments to bondholders.
It's a huge headwind. So even if Takeuchi wants to spend aggressively on her vision, the rising rates are forcing her hand. The supplementary budget for fiscal year 2025 was massive, 18.3 trillion yen for things like inflation relief and disaster resilience. But the initial budget for FY 2026 had to be much tighter.
So she's caught in a vice between her grand economic ambition and the bond vigilantes. Is that why she's pushing so hard for this new government efficiency bureau?
Yes. This is a critical piece of her fiscal puzzle. You could think of it as Japan's version of the DOG, the Department of Government Efficiency that we've seen discussed in the U.S.
The idea of finding savings within the government itself.
Exactly. She wants this new bureau to conduct a top-to-bottom review of all special task measures, all subsidies to legacy industries, and to streamline the bureaucracy. It's about cutting the fat to free up money to fund the muscle.
It really does sound like she's trying to run Japan like a giant national startup. You pivot to high-growth sectors, you burn cash to achieve that growth, and you ruthlessly cut overhead elsewhere.
And you have to move fast. That's the key. A startup can't wait 6 months for a funding decision. She can't move at the speed she wants if every subsidy bill or tax reform has to survive months of debate in a twisted diet.
It all connects. It always comes back to the structural bypass. She needs the political supermajority to clear the path for her economic strategy to even have a chance.
The bypass clears the road. The economic policy is the car she wants to drive down it.
But there's one more layer to this. The road itself is going through a very, very dangerous neighborhood. We have to talk about geopolitics.
You absolutely cannot understand Takeuchi's domestic power grab without looking at the pressures coming from Washington and Beijing. And right now, the Trump risk is front and center.
Takeuchi flew to the U.S. and met with President Donald Trump in late October 2025. How is that meeting perceived?
It was seen as a very deliberate move. She is explicitly positioning herself as the natural successor to the Abe line in foreign policy.
Shinzo Abe was famously the Trump whisperer.
He was. He built a personal rapport with President Trump that no other world leader could match. Takeuchi is sending a very clear signal to Washington. I am the new Abe. I am the strong, reliable partner you need in Asia.
Because a weak, divided Japan makes Washington very nervous.
Washington absolutely hates what they call the salad bowl of Japanese politics.
Yeah.
You know, the fragmented parties, the chaotic decision-making, the revolving door of prime ministers we saw before Abe.
Right. They look at China's rise, they look at North Korea's missiles, and they want Tokyo to be a stable, predictable fortress.
And if Japan has a minority government that can't pass a defense budget or can't ratify a new security treaty because Ishin threatens to walk or the upper house blocks it, the entire U.S.-Japan alliance is weakened.
So Takeuchi's argument for a supermajority isn't just for a domestic audience. It's a signal to the Pentagon and the State Department. Don't worry, I've got this under control.
Exactly. And to back up that signal, she's pushing for some very hawkish new military capabilities. things that were unthinkable for Japan just a few years ago.
Like what?
The coalition agreement she signed with Ishin specifically mentions the goal of developing and acquiring next-generation nuclear-powered submarines.
Nuclear-powered submarines for Japan. I mean, that is a massive, massive deviation from the post-war pacifist constitution.
It is a seismic shift.
Yeah.
And they're not just talking about nuclear propulsion. They're talking about submarines with VLS vertical launch systems,
Which would allow them to launch long-range counterstrike missiles.
This is hard power projection, plain and simple. It's part of the broader push to accelerate Japan's new national security strategy.
How is Beijing reacting to all this?
Well, it's a real paradox for China. On one hand, they deeply fear a strong, stable, hawkish Takeuchi administration. They know she'll be tough on Taiwan, she'll be tough on the Senkaku Islands dispute. But if she fails, if she calls this election and doesn't get her majority,
then Japan falls back into political chaos.
it falls back into what the Chinese call the politics of indecision. And a weak, divided Japan is a strategic opportunity for Beijing to exert influence, to peel Tokyo away from Washington. So they're watching this election with extreme interest.
What about the other key relationship in the region with South Korea?
It's complicated, as always. Takeuchi met with the South Korean president, Lee Jae-myung. They agreed to continue the shuttle diplomacy that's helped to thaw relations. But underneath it all, there's the Yasukuni factor.
The Yasukuni Shrine in Tokyo. It's the eternal flashpoint in East Asia.
It is. Takeuchi comes from the most conservative nationalist wing of the LDP. Visiting the shrine, which honors convicted war criminals among Japan's war dead, is deeply important to her and her political base.
But every time a prime minister visits, it causes outrage in China and South Korea.
And this time, the U.S. is also desperately signaling to her, please do not go. They are trying to build a tight trilateral security framework, U.S., Japan, South Korea, to counter China. A visit to Yasukuni by Takeuchi would risk blowing that entire framework up.
So it's a classic tightrope walk between her personal ideology and her strategic necessity.
She has to choose which is more important.
There's one final piece of this whole security puzzle that feels like it's straight out of a spy novel. Her plans for intelligence reform.
This is arguably the most ambitious structural change she is proposing. The coalition agreement calls for the creation of a brand new National Intelligence Agency, an NIA, and a separate Foreign Intelligence Service by fiscal year 2027.
Japan has never really had a unified foreign intelligence agency like the CIA or MI6 has it. It's always been fragmented.
It's been spread out between the National Police Agency, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Cabinet Intelligence and Research Office. It's a mess. And because of that, Japan has often been called a spy oven. It's leaky. Information doesn't flow well.
So she wants to centralize it all.
Centralize it and give it more power. And alongside creating these new agencies, she wants to pass an anti-spy legal framework.
Which sounds like Japan's version of the Foreign Agents Registration Act in the U.S.
That's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
A tool to counter foreign political influence and espionage. But you have to imagine trying to pass a controversial anti-spy law in a parliament controlled by the opposition.
The civil liberties arguments, the protests, it would be a legislative nightmare.
It would be dead on arrival in the upper house. Unless you have a two-thirds majority in the lower house and you can just bypass them completely.
And suddenly the whole picture just snaps into focus. The intelligence agencies, the nuclear submarines, the fusion reactors, the golden rule for bond issuance, none of it, not a single piece, can happen without first achieving that political bypass.
She is trying to convert her sky-high 70 or 80% personal approval rating into hard, durable institutional dominance. She's trying to escape the messy salad bowl of a fragmented diet by securing enough seats to render not just the opposition, but also her own troublesome coalition partners effectively irrelevant.
It's a gamble of truly historic proportions.
It is. The stakes could not be higher.
So as we wrap this up, it really is a stunning picture. We've talked about the constitutional mechanics, the economic vision, and the geopolitical pressures.
And all interconnected.
The administration is building what amounts to a Ferrari engine of state capacity. These new intelligence agencies, the constitutional override mechanisms, the streamlined investment bureaus. It's a machine designed for incredible speed and power. But here is the final crucial thought. If they fail to secure the driver's seat in this election, if they fall short of that majority on February 8th, that brand new Ferrari engine will either stall completely on the factory floor, or it will be driven by a committee of bickering coalition partners who can't even agree on which way to turn the steering wheel. The machinery of absolute power is being assembled. The only uncertainty left is who exactly will be allowed to turn the key.
And we will know the answer in just over 1 week's time.
We certainly will. We'll be watching the results on February 8th very, very closely. Thank you for walking us through all this.
My pleasure. It's a fascinating moment.
And thank you, as always, for listening. We'll see you on the other side of the election.